Hello Americans, welcome to our channel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images in video we use just for explanation and it's free use also.
When coastal guards intercepted this strange blue boat, they had no idea that it was about to become the center point of a nightmare situation. The blue metallic vessel did not show up on any of their radars. And when they ventured inside the ship, there was no way to stop the following events. Coast Guard intercepts strange blue boat. Then they take a look inside. The blue floating ship was spotted during a routine checkup about 3 miles from shore. The team of 7 coastal guards almost sailed past it, but then one crew member pointed and screamed, "Guys, there's something in the water over there." At first, it seemed like a speckle on the horizon. However, as their own boat got closer, the team quickly noticed that the floating vessel was much bigger than initially thought. The boat had an appearance unlike anything they had ever encountered. It barely had any windows, except for a few small glass frames on top, but the strangest part was, the boat did not seem to appear on their ship's radar at all. The crew's captain checked the monitor again, but for some reason it only detected their own vessel. The boat was a mystery, and its blue color, which almost blended perfectly with the sea's waves, added to this feeling. The crew needed to find out more, and the next logical step was to call out the person steering the mysterious boat. "Hello, this is the Coastal Guard. Would the person inside the blue vessel please step out and introduce himself?" But no matter how many times they pleaded, nobody seemed to answer. An atmosphere filled with tension was present, and it could only be resolved by taking a closer look. So without hesitation, the team tossed a rope with a hook in the end toward the blue boat so they could pull it in. That, however, did not exactly go according to plan either. At first glance, the boat was not that large, so with a full team of strong, pulling men, they should have been able to draw the boat near. But the mysterious thing would not budge an inch. Instead, it was their own boat that was pulled forward. "What is this thing?" the captain spoke nervously. "There is more than meets the eye with this thing. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg," one of the crew members stated as their 2 ships finally touched. This crew member, however, would come to regret this statement because it resulted in the captain ordering him and a colleague to lead the investigation. Brendan, the Coastal Guard tasked with the search, was hesitant, but with his crew watching, he could not disappoint. Carefully, he placed his first few steps on top of the blue boat as he inched toward the small top windows. His crew member and mate John joined him, and together they tried to peek inside. The tiny windows, however, did not provide much insight because the view through them appeared almost pitch black. There was only one thing they could do. "We need to open her up," Brendan explained to his friend. John agreed, and together they lifted the hatch on top of the vessel. With a loud creak, the top hatch of the boat folded open, revealing a ladder downward. They could not see the bottom, which increased their nerves tenfold. The 2 men stared at their captain, hoping for him to call them back. But the old sailor simply spurred them on. "Go ahead, we're right here." Brendan reached inside his back pocket, pulled out a flashlight, and used it to illuminate the ground beneath. After that, the 2 men ventured downward into the boat, a decision they would soon come to regret deeply. Once at the bottom, Brendan and John used the flashlight to look around. The ship's inside looked even more worn down than its outer exterior. It appeared to be only bare metal, except for the center console, which had seen better days. "There's no one here, so who piloted the boat?" John said, confused. Brendan shrugged and tried to communicate his findings with the outside crew. But then, the connection coming from Brendan's walkie-talkie was jittery, and words were hard to understand. But then things got dire in a hurry. A creak was heard above the 2 men, and then suddenly the top hatch closed on its own. The coastal boat's captain and the other crew saw this happening, and widespread panic occurred. They tried to ask Brendan and John if they were all right, but the communication signal was gone completely because of the closed hatch. The 2 investigating crew members were cut off from the main group. And that was just the start of their problem, because immediately afterward, the boat started to vibrate tremendously. Brendan and John climbed the ladder and stared at their coastal boat in fear. But unfortunately, that would be the final glimpse they got, because the blue boat had a mind of its own and was starting to submerge completely underneath the ocean's surface. What the hell is going on? Brendan, who was full of panic on the inside, still did his best to distress his colleague. "John, calm down. The boat isn't taking on water, so we are not sinking." It seems that this intentional that remark, however, did not calm John down. If it's intentional, then who's doing this? The two men quickly reached a state of panic, even Brendan, who tried to keep his cool for as long as he could. They slammed their fist against the metal hatch atop the ladder, but there was no budging it. This was futile, and just a few seconds later the boat was completely submerged underwater. And then a realization hit inside Brendan's brain. This isn't just any boat, it is a submarine of sorts. John nodded and agreed with this thought, but that did not solve their dire situation. The two crew members desperately tried to communicate with the main boat, but the signal was completely dead. Brendan's thoughts went back to the moment they first discovered that strange blue vessel. It did not show up on the radar. It was camouflaged well with its blue color, and it blocked out all forms of communication. This boat was incredibly stealthy, but why so? What was its purpose? It wouldn't be long before the two fearful coastal guards would find out, because the submarine was moving to an unknown location, one with great consequences. But until that time, Brendan and John had nothing to do but wait. They used this time to search the submarine for possible clues. The first part of their investigation was the main console on the north side of the sub. It looked straight out of an 80s movie, with heavy-duty buttons on it and wires running out back. However, the machine didn't seem to control any part of the ship. But that's when John called out something. "Brandon, there is a door over here." Brendan turned around and gazed at his friend. John stood on the submarine's other side and was pointing at a heavy metal handle attached to a massive doorway. In their mode of panic, they completely overlooked this part. What could be behind it? The two men joined forces and started pushing the handle downward, hoping their combined strength would be enough to open this doorway. But this door, just like the hatch on top, seemed to be too powerful for these two desperate men to open. Things looked hopeless for a while, but then, just as Brendan and John placed their defeated bodies on the submarine floor, the boat started to vibrate intensely. It was the same vibration that occurred when they sunk down about 30 minutes ago, but this time they clearly went upward. "There's light coming through the top window," John stated excitedly. But this excitement was quickly shunned by Brendan, who was starting to realize that this entire journey would probably not have a happy ending. When the submarine was fully above water, loud voices were heard atop the vessel. "Somebody is coming in, hide quickly," Brendan said to his distracted colleague. The two men jumped up from their seated position and hid behind the console on the other end of the boat. And right after they reached their hiding position, the hatch on top opened up. At that moment, three individuals climbed downward and made their way to the locked door. Brendan carefully peeked around the corner and saw how the shady-looking individuals entered the locked compartment of the submarine empty-handed. But when they emerged, they were carrying large packages. What was this place? And what were they taking out? Brendan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all. The men were large and bulky in stature and made repeated trips up and downward, carrying dozens of large packages each to the surface. The process took about 30 minutes, and Brendan and John were lucky not to be discovered. But that did not mean the two coastal guards were out of trouble. When the shady men were eventually done unloading the submarine's contents, it was quiet inside the vessel. Neither Brendan nor John dared to speak, but both of them noticed that the individuals had left the top part of the ship open. This was their chance to escape, and both of them knew it. The two men knew what to do, so with Brendan leading the charge, they climbed up the ladder. Once at the top, the coastal workers reared their heads out of the boat and felt the cold ocean breeze on their faces. But that was not all, because the boat's location instantly shocked both men. They were in the middle of the ocean with no land on the side, but around them were four massive floating pillars holding a massive oil rig platform on top. "Where the hell has this ship taken us?" John spoke nervously. Nobody appeared in sight, and staying inside the submarine was no option, so Brendan and John carefully climbed the long ladder that connected the submarine to the main platform above, and once they got there, a huge surprise awaited them. There was much activity on top of the oil platform. Workers were lifting boxes, and machines were transporting cargo from left to right. Brendan and John managed to stay hidden behind some large shipping containers, and together they tried to plan out their next move. One thing was immediately clear: no oil drilling was being practiced here. But what was the purpose of this floating deck then? The two men carefully and secretively maneuvered about the place. A couple of times they almost got caught. One time, John tripped over a loose wire, and just a moment later 2 workers peered backward and nearly spotted them. But in the end, they managed to traverse the platform unseen. And all of this sneaking around eventually led them to witness the main event. They hid behind a large crate and saw an older man. Brendan figured he was in his mid-60s. He was well-dressed compared to the others on the platform, and the 3 individuals from before placed the stack of large packages before the older man's feet. "He must be the leader," John whispered. They saw how the leader cracked open the foil covering one of the packages, and from it he pulled a thick stack of money. When Brendan and John saw this, they knew that criminal activities were happening. Normally, they would work with the police when something like this was discovered, but in this case, Brendan and John were stranded and all alone. The only thing they could do now was observe. They watched how the leader lifted his hand and signaled for something in the back to be brought forward. An equally large package arrived from the back and was placed beside the money. A knife was shoved inside this package and its contents stuck to the blade. The eyes of the 2 coastal guards grew twice in size because this was a product they knew very well. As Coast Guards, they confiscated a lot of illegal substances, and this was definitely a form of powdered drugs. But the quantities they witnessed today were on a whole other level than the volume they were used to. Brendan's biggest bust consisted of roughly 4 kilograms, but just this one stack must have been at least 10 times as much. And there was probably much more in the back. And then everything became very clear. This was an illegal trafficking ring. Brendan figured that the money must have come from America, and the illegal drugs were probably produced in one of the countries in South America. They used the stealthy submarine to transport everything from one place to the other, and this oil rig platform was the perfect central point for it all to come together. It was far enough out at sea to be detected, and it appeared to be just a normal oil rig from a distance. This also must be where the submarine is operated from, Brendan quietly said to his friend. Brendan got nervous and excited simultaneously. Their small drug arrests at the shore were probably remnants of this big operation, and by accident the 2 of them had landed in the mother lode. They had to do something, but what? John checked the walkie-talkie in his back pocket and saw a signal again. The 2 coastal workers snuck away from the leader in the threatening scene. In a quiet corner at the far end of the platform, they tried to contact their crew again. To their surprise, it worked the first time. John and Brendan turned the device's volume to low and explained their situation. The team was relieved to hear that Brendan and John were still alive, but when they heard where they were, shock was the main reaction. "Come over here now with backup," Brendan insisted. He shared their coordinates and hung up so they could remain hidden. But then a problem immediately presented itself. Brendan and John witnessed that the submarine from before was again being filled up, this time with drugs, most likely. The 2 of them needed to stop this. They estimated that they only had about 30 minutes to do so, since that was how long it took to unload the vessel last time. This thought turned out to be right, because after almost exactly 30 minutes, the submarine was ready to make a new run. The criminal organization leader climbed the stairs to his control room, from where he could start the submarine's engine. But this part of his plan would not work today. The man tried to open the control room's door, but it was locked. When the well-dressed man looked up, he stared right into Brendan and John's faces. The 2 coastal guards managed to sneakily avoid all the workers and eventually took over the main operating room of the rig. This boat wasn't going anywhere. With the ship unable to move and the criminal's plans for a future shipment halted, frustration settled in. He ordered his men to break down the door, but coastal reinforcements arrived right before the first kick was placed. It was Brendan and John's crewmates, and they had many police officers supporting them. The traffickers were quickly arrested after that, since they had nowhere to run in the middle of the ocean. Brendan and John were released from the control room and celebrated as heroes. This was the biggest bust in their career. And even though the day started with a scare, it couldn't have ended any better.